The situation between Russia and NATO is like a ticking time bomb. With every day that passes, something else happens to escalate tensions. Tick. Russia sends drones into NATO territory. Tock. NATO members tell Russia that it will respond to these types of actions with force. Tick. Russia sends fighter jets. Tock. NATO countries say they'll shoot these jets down. Now, that bomb is on the verge of exploding. NATO is planning a military response to Russia's hybrid warfare. Vladimir Putin isn't going to take that threat lying down. Threats coming out of the Kremlin are escalating up to and including talk about using nuclear weapons. On October 9th, the Financial Times published a report in which it said that NATO allies are discussing how to provide a more forceful response to Russia's recent provocations. Since the beginning of September, Russia has used its aerial assets to invade NATO airspace, including sending drones into Polish airspace and flying a trio of MiG-31 fighter jets into Estonia. Hybrid warfare is Russia's goal, and it's using these incidents to poke and prod at NATO, testing and threatening in equal measure to see what kind of response it's going to get. That response is coming. Putin isn't going to like it. The Financial Times says that talks between NATO members, which are currently ongoing, began as a discussion between a small group of representatives of the states that have been most directly affected by Russia's actions. Now those talks are ballooning. Two unnamed officials who spoke to the outlet said that a much broader discussion is now taking place, as allied capitals have realized that the threats posed by Russia's hybrid warfare campaign extend beyond the borders of the affected countries. Putin is challenging NATO, and that means that NATO is going to have to take a more aggressive stance to serve as a deterrent to Russia. There are active discussions on these issues, how to better and more efficiently respond to Russia, said one of the Financial Times sources, who is noted as a NATO diplomat. The same source noted that the talks are still in their very early stages, and they come off the back of two emergency meetings held in September following the drone and fighter jet incursions we mentioned previously. The big question is, what is this military response going to look like? With no timeline or obligation attached to any change in NATO posture, it's difficult to say for certain. However, there are several ideas reportedly being bandied around, including the conversion of surveillance drones currently operating near the NATO border with Russia into attack drones that could intercept incoming threats. Currently, those drones are deployed to collect intelligence on what Russia is doing in those regions where its territory borders countries like Finland and the Baltic states. Arming those drones would send a clear message to Putin that any future attempts he makes to cross those borders will be met with force. It's possible that these newly armed drones could become part of the proposed drone wall that NATO is planning to create. Bloomberg reported on this wall in an October 7th article, noting that the concept is yet to be fully fleshed out but is under discussion within NATO. The idea of creating a drone wall has also started gaining momentum since Russia's hybrid warfare campaign escalated in September, the outlet says. NATO is likely to take several cues from Ukraine when creating this drone wall, given Ukraine's success with drones and its growing drone manufacturing sector. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's now capable of building 10 million drones per year with the right investment. NATO may be planning on making that investment. Ukraine would then be drawn into the NATO fold, despite not being a member of the group, which is guaranteed to anger Putin. Via this cooperation with Ukraine, Bloomberg says, NATO might also be able to gain access to interceptor drones that are capable of taking out incoming Russian drones before they hit their targets. These drones cost as little as $500 each, Business Insider reported in October, making them a much more attractive option for a drone wall than the more expensive air defense systems such as the US-made Patriot. Integrating these types of drones into a system that employs sensors and surveillance equipment could be the key to making a drone wall work. What NATO is reportedly proposing in terms of transforming its surveillance drones into attack drones would work within this structure. The proposed drones could pull double duty by identifying and attacking incoming threats, in addition to recording data that other elements of the drone wall could use. However, none of this is confirmed. All we know right now is that NATO is discussing these types of drone-based solutions. Another proposal, according to the Financial Times, involves lowering the bar for NATO's pilots to open fire on any Russian threats that enter NATO territory. This streamlining of pilot instructions would be especially relevant on NATO's eastern flanks, where Russia's hybrid warfare tactics are at their most intense. This is a proposal that has already been doing the rounds within several NATO nations. Poland has already said that it's willing to shoot down any Russian jets that enter its territory, as we discussed in a past video. Check out that video if you want the details about Poland's warning and Russia's response to it. Newsweek also spoke to a NATO official in the wake of the Financial Times report. That official implied that discussions about pilots being given clear instructions on when they can engage Russian threats are ongoing and have been for a while. When it comes to the range of hybrid or grey zone activities we've seen, including cyber attacks, drone incursions, or attempts to sabotage critical infrastructure, NATO is working closely with allies to ensure that we're taking appropriate steps to ensure we can deter and defend. This isn't new, and we continue to adapt as the situation evolves, the official said. Though generic on the surface, we can read a lot into the "this isn't new" aspect of the quote. NATO allies are already talking about using fighter jets to shoot down Russian aerial assets. This official is saying that those kinds of talks are taking place on a much wider scale. Shooting down Russian threats is an approach that has the support of US President Donald Trump when asked whether NATO nations should do just that when on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in September. These calls have also been backed by the European Commission or EC President Ursula von der Leyen. In a September 24th interview with CNN, the EC President said, "My opinion is we have to defend every square centimetre of the territory. That means if there is an intrusion in the airspace, after warning, after being very clear, of course the option of shooting down a fighter jet that is intruding our airspace is on the table." You'll see several caveats in that quote. Warnings, being very clear, whatever that may mean, these are all safeguards against NATO going overboard, but they also serve as aerial red tape that could prevent a member nation from firing when it's within its rights to do so. The Financial Times reports that its sources says that setting and streamlining clear rules of engagement for dealing with Russian aerial assets in NATO airspace is on the agenda for the discussions that are already being held. Another suggestion is one with which Russia will be very familiar: projecting power. Conducting more NATO-led military exercises in regions that border Russia is an option that's currently being discussed. The Financial Times says that these exercises would place a particular focus on the more remote and unguarded parts of the eastern flank. The intended message is clear. It's not just about showcasing how much modern military might NATO could bring to bear if Russia escalated to the point of forcing a direct conflict. But focusing on these previously less guarded regions, NATO also wants to show Putin that the organization has eyes everywhere. Whatever remote regions Russia may have scouted as potential routes of attack will not only be guarded by a drone wall, but they'll be hosting military exercises that make it impossible for Russia to know whether it's safe to take advantage of these regions. This approach could perhaps see NATO's Iron Defender exercise, which is typically led by Poland and involved over 30,000 soldiers in 2025, expanded considerably. Estonia, Latvia, and Finland, all of which are NATO member nations that directly border Russia, could also become the locations for new NATO exercises if the Defense Collective decides to go down this route. Again, we'll point out that discussions are ongoing and they're still in their early stages. NATO's military response to Russia could include some, all, or even none of these ideas. We won't know for sure until the current talks end and action is taken. The Financial Times adds that NATO may not even publicly announce what it intends to do, stating that all four of the officials it spoke to said the same thing. There is a certain logic here. Saying less means revealing less. When Russia doesn't know what NATO's full plan is, there's less chance that Putin and his cronies can come up with a counterplan to overcome what NATO does. It's not just NATO that's coming up with ideas on how to deal with Russia's hybrid warfare. The European Union, or EU, is getting in on the act. The EU isn't taking a military approach, as most in the group are part of NATO and likely believe that such direct action is better conducted under the NATO banner. However, as Euronews reported on October 7th, the EU is considering a proposal that would restrict the movements of Russian diplomats across EU territory. This may seem like a small action at first, however, it represents a clear drawing of lines, a shift to an us versus them mentality that Russia has had for a long time. With these travel bans, the EU would communicate to Putin and his diplomats that the bloc isn't interested in what Russia has to say anymore. It will only be interested in what Russia does, and it will respond accordingly. We know why NATO and the EU are doing all of this in the direct sense. Russia's hybrid warfare, particularly its recent use of drones and fighter jets, provides more than enough reasons for NATO to consider a military response. However, drilling deeper into the basic answer to why NATO is doing all of this reveals a set of goals that the collective defense organization wants to achieve. The first of those goals is simple: raise the cost of Russia's hybrid warfare campaign. Even all of the methods we've discussed so far wouldn't be enough to stop Russia if it were truly determined to send another drone or jet into NATO airspace. NATO's eastern flank was around 1,550 miles long back in 2022. Finland's ascension to NATO member status added another 830 miles or so to that extensive border with Russia. No matter how complex a drone wall NATO can create, it's almost impossible to watch every mile of the eastern flank. But that's not the point. The real point is to make Russia's hybrid warfare campaign so expensive that Putin has to very carefully consider whether he wants to continue with it. If NATO's pilots are given the green light to shoot down Russian jets in NATO airspace, for instance, that means Russia is risking millions of dollars if it tries to pull the trick it pulled against Estonia again. Military Watch magazine says that a single MiG-31 airframe is valued at over $60 million. Add a trained pilot and whatever weapons that jet is carrying into the mix, and Russia will be taking a massive monetary gamble every time it sends jets into NATO airspace. Sure, the gamble might pay off. The eastern flank is long enough for jets to sneak over and then back again. But that would also eliminate the point of sending them in the first place. Russia wants its jets to be caught in the act because that serves as proof to NATO that Russia can enter its airspace. If those jets are caught and shot down, an intimidation tactic turns into a massive money loser for the Kremlin. And right now, Russia can't afford to lose much more money. Over 3.5 years of attritional warfare in Ukraine have done a real number on Russia's finances. On October 7th, Novaya Gazeta published an article in which it said that Russia's current levels of military spending have already left the country in a catch-22 situation. It points out that Russia has dedicated 38% of its federal budget to military spending up to 2028, which includes over $154 billion earmarked specifically for the Ukraine war. This budget was announced even though several senior Russian officials sounded the alarm at June's St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, telling Putin that his war expenditure was sending Russia headlong into an economic crisis. Stagnation seems to lie in Russia's economic future, and Russia's wartime spending may be even higher than the country has revealed. That's according to Craig Kennedy. In February, Kennedy published a report on Russia's war costs, revealing that Putin has been funding the Ukraine war with off-budget debt. Under legislation enacted in February 2022, the state has taken control of war-related lending at Russia's major banks. It's directing them to extend preferential loans on terms set by the state to a wide range of businesses providing goods and services for the war. Since mid-2022, this state-directed war funding scheme has helped drive a large part of Russia's anomalous 36.6 trillion rubles, $446 billion, surge in overall corporate borrowing, Kennedy writes. He then points to all of these loans as being the main reason why Russia's domestic economy is dealing with high interest rates and soaring inflation. The bottom has to fall out for Russia's economy eventually. NATO plans to show Putin that it'll only add to his country's economic woes if he keeps pushing his luck with his hybrid warfare tactics. Beyond the economic impact, NATO has a second objective with its planned military response: reducing fear. After all, creating fear is the goal for Putin. Going back to what we touched on earlier, Putin wants NATO nations to know that Russia's aerial assets are entering their airspace. Russia is waging a form of psychological warfare, making the nations affected wonder if the next incident is the one where Russia's drones or fighter jets do some serious damage. NATO can never quite be certain if Russia is baiting a response or is about to escalate. It's all about destabilization, as The Guardian's Catherine Butler wrote on October 8th. She says that Russia's hybrid war has started to feel a bit close for comfort for many Europeans, noting that Russia's drones have recently caused issues in Germany and Denmark. A cynic might say that Russia straying beyond the nations that make up the eastern flank may be what has really triggered NATO's current discussions about military actions. Regardless of whether or not that's true, too many NATO nations are starting to feel the fear. The entire point of the collective defense bloc is to eradicate that type of fear, so military actions in response to what Russia is doing seem logical. Of course, we've yet to tackle the biggest question that has arisen from this looming change in NATO's posture: what does Russia think about all of this? To say Putin isn't happy would be an understatement. On October 9th, Le Monde reported that Russia is already threatening what it will only call a significant response to any European nation that continues to support Ukraine. Speaking on October 2nd at a forum in the Black Sea region of Sochi, Putin himself said, "Germany says its army should once again become the strongest in Europe. Let's see what that means. No one should have doubt that Russia's countermeasures will not take a long time to come." Putin went on to claim that Russia has never initiated a military confrontation, which is baffling considering what's happening in Ukraine. He then, as he has so often done, shifted the blame for the Ukraine war onto Europe's shoulders. He cautioned European nations, claiming that their leaders are allowing hysteria over an impending war with Russia to rule their decision-making. These comments may have come before the Financial Times report, but they address the very nations that Russia knows are talking about formulating a military response to what Putin is doing. Russia's propagandists have also gone into overdrive, Le Monde reports. It shares quotes from several of Russia's pro-military Telegram channels. Their focus seems to lie on Russia's shadow fleet, to which European nations have started to pay very close attention. A typical comment comes from the Colonel Kassad Telegram channel, which says, "I'd like to remind you that in response to the capture of Iranian tankers, Tehran captured Western tankers. The West only understands force. They're now testing the limits of what's tolerable. Russia is trying to flip the script. It wasn't Russia's fault that Putin invaded Ukraine. That was all down to Europe and its NATO members. Now it's not Russia that is testing the limits of what's tolerable by sending aerial assets into NATO airspace. NATO is at fault again. It's pushing the boundaries by focusing on shadow fleet vessels that shouldn't be sailing and by considering a military response to Russia's threatening actions. It's all propaganda that's a product of the Kremlin spin machine. And as you might have guessed, the word nuclear has also been mentioned. On September 25th, which was after Russia conducted its hybrid warfare campaigns in Poland and Estonia, and around the time that the idea of shooting down Russian jets first started coming up, a major ally started using the nuclear word. That ally is Sergei Karaganov, who is the honorary chairman of the Russian Council for Foreign and Defense Policy. Speaking about the impact that an attritional war with NATO would have on Russia, Karaganov said, "This European contagion must be eradicated. We need to prepare to strike, or at least make them understand that we are ready. It won't necessarily be a nuclear strike, but we must prepare." He added that a nuclear war with NATO can be won. That kind of major war may be coming. Zelensky has hinted that Putin is considering a new round of military mobilization in Russia that could trigger the kind of war that Karaganov mentions. If there is mobilization, it will be a challenge to Europe. He will start a major war, Zelensky said on October 8th. Perhaps NATO's ultimate goal with its potential military maneuvers is to prevent tensions from escalating to the point where such a war seems inevitable. Sending decisive messages now that NATO is prepared to take out Russian assets when Putin pushes things too far may be just enough to convince Russia's leader to back off. Or it could be the sort of escalation Putin is looking for to give him an excuse to start a Europe-wide war. There are plenty of questions surrounding just how effective Russia could be if it entered a full conventional war with NATO. Ukraine is already giving Putin more than enough trouble. So much trouble, in fact, that Russia is being forced to deploy rotting Soviet-era armor because Ukraine has obliterated everything else. Find out more in our video and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of the latest decisions NATO makes about how to deal with Russia. And thank you as always for watching.